Sending movie stars on location to the middle of Africa in the early 50s wasn't the most common practice for movie studios. It was risky, it was expensive, and studio heads couldn't control what the filmmakers were doing out there. But I guess when your names are John Ford, Clark Gable, Grace Kelly, and Ava Gardner, you get to do what you want. Trouble is, if you go that far out in the middle of nowhere, where are you going to find a delicious cup of coffee in the morning? Although note that I wrote most of this promo copy before I watched the movie, a film where they seem to get to enjoy all the luxurious trappings of home, including, I'm sure, the best coffee of that day. Still, bear with me. I'm going somewhere with this. But yeah, you modern North Americans, not including Mexicans unfortunately, have an option that those big stars didn't have then, even if they were back home on our soil. Those of us who live in the now, can order the very freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans that can be found in Canada, and those are provided by Sparkplug Coffee. Sparkplug has a plethora of options when it comes to roast beans, but also when it comes to blends, and rotating seasonal blends are an option too. And if you like it half calf or decaf, go that way. Sparkplug's got you covered. My fellow Canadians will get free shipping, but those of us in this country and our American chumsters will get whatever they pay for within a week. What will make this even better is if you sign up for a membership in the Autopilot Coffee Club. Members get deals, they get perks, and they save money on every single order. And those deliveries will come when you need them, not whenever Sparkplug decides to robotically send them. This just isn't a Coffee of the Month club, so lay that concern to rest. The website to click over to is sparkplug.coffee/HYES. Using our HYES promo code will save you 20%. And you can take advantage of that deal whether you're ordering for the first time, or the 5th time, or the 69th time, although it's a one-time thing. So that's it for me trying to convince you to order what our sponsor has to offer. Now you and I need to discover if today's movie is good, bad, or somewhere in between. And, action! Have you ever seen Mogambo? What's the good word, good people, and thanks for spending even some of your day with me on the 571st podcast that can be found on this channel. Have you ever seen reviews and spoils, classic motion pictures every Monday, and obviously on certain Fridays too? I'm your safari enthusiast, Ryan Ellis. Actually, the closest I've ever been to that part of the world is when I went to the African Lion Safari here in Ontario when I was a little kid. Thrill to the animal show! Fellow Ontarians might get that. I found the commercial. I thought that was what it says. Yep, they say, African Lion Safari, thrill to the animal show. When I get into your ears during these Friday extravaganzas, I do it alone. Although Bev will be back on Monday when we cover our last romantic movie here in Love in a Word Month, which is a stretch where all the lovey flicks we chose are just one word long. I'll be itemizing the plot lines one at a time today, going off on tangents, as I always do, and enjoying a dollop or two of tomfoolery. My best friend in the world is tomfoolery. Well, after Bev and Curious George over there. So, my excuse to review an Ava Gardner movie, better known as Mogambo, was released by MGM on October 9th, 1953. Could have covered it last year when it was 70 years old, but I guess it is still 70 years old. It hasn't been October yet this year, so really it is still 70. Anyway, Wikipedia says this was 9th at the US box office that year, so it did all right. Wiki also says that From Here to Eternity was number 2, and Shane was number 3 at the box office. Those are two classics we covered many years ago on this channel, and man, I love Shane. They were both on the AFI's Top 100 list. The original point of doing this podcast was covering that list. On Rotten Tomatoes, this one is sitting at 75% from the critics, but only 55% from the audiences, so the audiences say, boo earns. Well, I guess that's good, isn't it? Boo. They're saying boo. Are you saying boo or boo earns? Just 12 critics have written about the flick on that site with an average of 5.9 out of 10. So when you put it that way, they also say boo. But at least the percentage at 75% is well above that 60% threshold to get a fresh tomato. Those are actually pretty low numbers for a John Ford flick. He has so many perfect 100% ratings on Rotten Tomatoes, and lots of others between 90 and 100% also. Mogambo was an Oscar nominee for Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress. Ava Gardner was one of the 4 ladies up against the eventual winner, Audrey Hepburn, who won for a movie I reviewed last year, Roman Holiday. To call Gardner's work here a leading performance is a little dubious. There are big stretches of this movie where Ava disappears entirely. Her character is present, sure, but the scenes are often about Clark Gable and Grace Kelly, especially in the second half. Still, Ava's pretty good in this, just maybe not quite award-worthy. Grace Kelly, and she didn't win anyway, because it was Audrey Hepburn. Grace Kelly faced off against Donna Reed in the supporting actress race, and obviously 3 others, including Thelma Ritter for Pickup on South Street, which I reviewed last year. Reed won that category, though, for From Here to Eternity. Not that I have much use for the Golden Globes, but just for the record, Grace Kelly did win that trophy in the supporting category for this film. Pretty good work in this movie. As for representation on the American Film Institute lists, this was up for the top 100 passions, but it didn't make the cut. And that nomination was worthy. This is a pretty intense love triangle type movie, even a love rhombus, I guess, but a love triangle, especially with the two big star ladies and the big star guy, Gable, Kelly, and Gardner. Although that's all the AFI love it got, and it isn't in the National Film Registry, so my setup here is done. By the way, though, I will probably refer to Grace Kelly only as Grace or by her character's name Linda, or even Mrs. Nordley, because Ava Gardner's character's last name is Kelly, and I often refer to her that way, so I try not to mix them up, except at the end when I talk about the actor credits. Oh, also, I can say I don't need to explain the director's sexual peccadillos for 5 or 10 minutes like I did when I talked about Manhattan 2 weeks ago. That's fortunate. John Ford does sound like he was a major SOB, but I don't think we need to cancel somebody who's been dead for over 50 years just because he did what most directors seemed to do back then, which was to be a bullying jerk unless he got his way. And in Jack Ford's case, he was often a bullying prick even when he did get his way. Anyway, let's kick off this Mogambo review vis-a-vis the plot. What goes on here? Well, the opening credits play over a shot of the African wilderness with some African music, some jaunty singers and such. Interestingly, Grace Kelly, okay, I'm saying her full name here, not Eloise Kelly, the Gardner character. Okay, anyway, she's not billed above the title the way that Clark Gable and Ava Gardner are. She gets a with credit after Gable, Gardner, and then the title, Mogambo. Looking at these opening shots of Africa reminds me that I should establish that they shot this flick on location in Kenya, Tanzania, Congo, and Uganda, and also a lot of it in a studio in England, and I believe also back in Hollywood. It's often very obvious that they're not in Africa, in fact. And hey, in a movie about the Dark Continent, how nice that a black man is the first human we see. He doesn't get to speak, and he's only on screen for a few seconds, but it's something. Then again, black people barely even have roles in Mogambo. There's a lot of them, and they get to do a lot in the background, but giving them lines wasn't part of the deal. But at least these aren't white guys in dark makeup. No blackface, I don't think so. This isn't the kind of movie where the main character shows up in a strange place and has to get to know what it's like there. Clark Gable as Victor Marswell is already living there. Vic and friends are dealing with an angry panther or a cougar or a jaguar or something that got caught in one of their traps. I'm guessing this wasn't an easy shoot from the standpoint of safety, considering they had all these wild animals on the set. Mr. Marswell gets back to his house, which is pretty big considering they're out in the middle of nowhere, only to find a woman's set of luggage and a lot of sexy undergarments strewn all over the place. And here's the reason I'm covering this movie, the sexy undergarments. Well, no, it's because of Ava Gardner, who was wearing them, I guess, supposedly, as Eloise Honey Bear Kelly. She's showering outside, and yes, we don't see anything racy, but there's always something risque about someone just being naked in the shower. There's a reason why as famous and as scary as the shower scene in Psycho is, it's also a little erotic. It starts off that she's obviously naked in the shower, so call me crazy, but that's pretty hot. If you like guys and they're the ones that are naked in the shower, that's pretty hot too. It's funny, I always have Wikipedia open, or IMDb, in a small part of the screen here. In the bottom left, I see Ava Gardner's picture. It's perfectly framed, actually, beneath the record program I have and to the side of my text on the right. But she's on the left in a small picture that's on Wikipedia, and she's in the shower. It's that scene. Anyway, this sultry socialite from New York is looking for her friend, a Maharaja. Wait a minute, was it the friend of the Maharaja? Anyway, he's supposed to be there, but he's canceled his trip. Since this is a romantic movie, Gable and Gardner are contractually obliged to snipe at each other at first. He wants her to hit the bricks, but she has no way to leave for another week, which is when the next boat floats by. Eloise certainly isn't dressed to be on safari, wearing a flowing skirt and a lovely green top that shows off every curve. She looks marvelous, though, which is no surprise. She's Ava Gardner. It's impressive that Marty Scorsese managed to outdo this beauty that she was in reality with who he cast to play her in The Aviator, Kate Beckinsale. Right around 2004 when The Aviator came out, KDB was arguably the most physically perfect woman in the world. Even 10 years later, that was probably true. Right up there with Diane Lane at that point, and I'm biased, but Rosario Dawson. But back to the story and their outfits and such. It's not like Gable is entirely dressed for this rugged environment either. He wears a pinky ring and a watch. What do you need a watch for when you're doing this kind of work? And isn't a pinky ring the kind of thing that can get snagged when you're working all day long and just rip your finger right off? And even though we see later that these guys know first aid, reattaching a ripped finger is likely not in their medical wheelhouse. And since I'm being pedantic about his outfit, we also see a few scenes after this that he has a piano in his house. That seems like an unnecessary schlep someone had to make. Eloise gets to know the animals. Thrill to the animal show. She shares a pretty sweet moment with a baby elephant, who goes right up to her and lets her snuggle its trunk. Later that night she can't sleep, so she shares her thoughts with Vic and they start to bond. Kelly, you're all right. And they get real close when she sees a giant python doing his snake thing across the room, looking for rats and mice. That tension didn't last long. They're already giving into their feelings about each other, and he's kissing her on the porch, hard, about a minute later. A little time passes, and they obviously got close enough that she cries when Vic announces that the boat will be there in a few minutes. So get packed. She fell in love, but I guess he enjoyed the casual sex and can leave it at that. Man versus woman stereotypes live on, especially back then. Eloise wistfully says adios to her baby elephant friend. She's even crazy enough about the little pachyderm to ask it to say goodbye to Mama. Before she's about to board the boat, Vic does the old, well, it was nice having you here. Too bad he didn't brung her any posies. For a macho man like Clark Gable in a movie made in the 50s directed by John Ford, he might as well be weeping right here. We up the star power when Grace Kelly arrives on that same boat that's going to take Honey Bear upriver. Grace is Linda Nordley, who's shown up with her husband Donald. He's played by Donald Sinden. I wonder if Sinden went all method on everybody and insisted that people call him by his character's first name. The Nordleys are there to study gorillas, although Vic is cheesed when he finds out. Finding them is tough and dangerous and possibly a fruitless mission, and he wasn't informed that that's why they booked the trip. Donald has gotten sick from the shots they had to take. Everyone keeps pronouncing it tsetse fly, although I always thought it was tsetse. Anyway, Vic gives him some drugs and tries to get his fever to break, but he gets slapped hard on the face by Linda for only doing that much. Lady, it's not like he's trying to let your husband die. Well, not yet. I'm assuming he and the guys working for him know more about medicine than you do also. Later that night, as Donnie Boy is recovering, Linda sincerely apologizes. Romance brewing? Now these two connect as they watch hippos fight in the river. As Boltchak puts it, 2 pretty girls in 1 week, and then cackles. Maybe he meant the hippos? It does seem unlikely that 2 people who look like Grace and Ava would be in a far-off place like this at almost the exact same time, and soon it's going to be the exact same time. It's just that the script told them to. And now they are there at the same time because Honey Bear comes back on a dinghy, or a little canoe, or whatever they called it, after the boat that was taking them away breaks down. The skipper tells Vicky Baby that the boat won't be ready to steam out of there for 4 weeks. Love triangle brewing? Kelly retires to her room, only to find Joe the Python lounging on the bed like Basil in A Clockwork Orange. Ah, that's just Joe. She really did chill out about snakes in that week she spent there because now she's just annoyed with him and grabs the covers to shake him off the bed, rather than shrieking at the sight of him on her bed like I would have. Although it is pretty dark in that room, I wonder if Ava Gardner wasn't anywhere around an actual real snake in these 2 shots, because the first time it was just a cutaway to it, and now here it could be a fake snake, it's a dark room, and maybe that's what it was, she shook off the bed. The 2 lovely ladies meet the next morning and they have a pleasant enough conversation, but then Kelly gets into a quarrel with the big man about Mrs. Nordley. Considering the new blonde lady is married and the great white hunter already has heat with Honey Bear, you'd think that Vic would be more than fine to give Moony Eyes to her instead. Well, love triangles can't be nice and neat now, can they? Where's the challenge in that? And if Grace Kelly and Clark Gable didn't get together for a little while in this movie, then I guess you have no movie. Linda falls into an animal trap and is cornered by a panther. Marswell's on the scene quickly and shotguns the sucker, saving her from an eaten. I assume they didn't actually shoot at and kill a panther just for the shot, although they did kill all kinds of horses back in the 50s, and before that, they would trip them for stunt scenes, and then they'd often break their legs, and they'd just shoot the horse right then and there. You cannot do that now. You shouldn't have done that then. The way this scary cat reacted to that shot, though, it was either a non-fatal rubber bullet or something that hit its flank, or that it was even a blast of air that came from below to simulate a gunshot. The panther seems more surprised than hurt. They get caught in a powerful windstorm on the way back to camp, and she's so frail for some reason that she collapses, and he has to carry her back. It looks like he's about to bed another babe out here in Africa, but she reluctantly goes back inside with tears in her eyes and a husband in her heart. And Honey Bear is hella jealous about all this. She's been watching with disdain while smoking at the other end of the porch. Everyone gussies up in fine suits and great dresses, and they scarf a fancy meal. They look classy and all, but why would people bring all this stuff out to the jungle? They're like Lisa Simpson taking a microscope to the beach. At least Lisa realized that was stupid and left it at home. They look great, but that's just silly. It's nice to see that the piano gets some use after dinner, though, as Dawn plays and Eloise sings. I think every big-budget Hollywood movie in the 40s and 50s felt obliged to have some kind of musical sequence, whether it made sense or not. Brownie, by the way, sings along during the second verse, and, well, I didn't mention it yet, he's wearing a full-on tuxedo. He took that on safari. It's one thing to take a suit, but a tuxedo. Vic changes his mind about taking the Nordleys out to see the gorillas, and we know why. Maybe he's planning to let Dawn drop into an animal trap and see if maybe a panther starts chewing on him. Honey Bear is both jealous and also cheesed that she can't stay at base camp because they'll all have to go on this gorilla adventure, leaving only a bare minimum of staff to take care of the animals they have there in the cages. And of course, people would be upset about the whole zoo part of this movie, but I don't know. I've never been that big against zoos. I can see why people have a problem with them now. I've seen Blackfish, about the Blackfish, is that what it's called? The one about the killer whale? Anyway, it's a zoo thing. Don't watch the movie if it bothers you. So at about the midway point of the film, they all load up in jeeps and head out to find some apes. Everyone bonds a little bit more, although Kelly continues to be annoyed at what is going on between the other 2 stars. She's either green with envy or she's about to throw up. Vic gives her a gun, just in case she needs to protect herself against lions and tigers and, well, not bears, because she's Honey Bear. They look out for their own, those honey bears and other bears. Then Toothpick Vic has a moment with Linda, and we can see how much she wants to break her marriage vows, although Donnie Baseball is oblivious to what's going on between the Gabes and the Grace. For some reason, Victor agrees to let natives throw spears at him during a game of human darts, and he does this shirtless. I read that Gable couldn't grow a lot of chest hair, but he must have been waxing anyway because his torso is positively hairless. Where's the Brazilian wax girl out in the African wilderness? Of course, they're wearing tuxes and drinking crates of wine out here too, so it's not like these rich people didn't get to do whatever they wanted. Maybe they had somebody come by once in a while and shave him down. Wax him down. Did they have waxing back then? I don't know. Eloise decides to apologize for cold-shouldering Linda so much, although the nervous blonde thinks it's unnecessary to get this blessing just to be with a man Honey Bear was already with. They start to fight about it, although Eloise keeps saying she came here to be your friend and leaves the door open to making peace between them. The 3 stars and a bunch of unnamed black Africans get in front of a projection screen and get rowed down a river with Brownie and Donnie, the 2 English fops, in another boat. When they get to where they're going, where Kelly is going to be dropped off to get a boat back to civilization, they come across some angry natives. Ford might not give these characters anything to say, nor give them names or anything rudimentary like that, but at least this isn't a pile of white guys in blackface. I like that these threatening fellows sing what sounds like a fun song, but considering the circumstances, it's quite intimidating, especially since our heroes are vastly outnumbered by all these guys and their spears. A spear! They take the commissioner with them, since he's badly hurt, and tells them they have to get out of there fast before things get really ugly. The white people and their team of black underlings are allowed to leave, but it does seem like bloody stuff would have gone down if they had lingered at all, let alone challenged these guys. They get to gorilla country, and the Gable and the Grace are barely warding off their lusty feelings for one another one day by a raging river. In fact, he stops warding and just up and kisses her, and then she kisses back and crumples in his meaty arms. Maybe they got to bumping right there by the river. Not sure. It was 1953. They didn't show anything other than the lip lock. She comes back to the Nordley tent and is flummoxed, clearly ashamed of kissing Vic with such passion, and possibly doing a lot more than that with him that we didn't get to see. They do find some gorillas who are climbing trees and beating chests. Don records the audio while Linda uses a boom mic to pick up all the apey sounds. What a thankless role this cuckold Donald Sinden has. Be a dope whose wife falls for some other guy, but you go about life as if all is hunky and also dory. John Ford shot some pretty good scenes with these big black gentlemen, although you can tell when it's studio footage versus, I assume, 16mm or something of documentary-type film of the gorillas. When you see them doing their thing, it looks a lot different and a lot grainier than when you see the actors reacting to probably nothing, being told, do that, there's gorillas over there. This is still marvelous footage, but it does remind me of the underwater scenes in Jaws, at least the shots where it's clearly not the mechanical shark. It's still an impressive great white that they filmed down in Australia, but it moves differently and doesn't have any barrels attached to it. I've always said I think the fake shark in Jaws is weird and scarier because it doesn't look quite real. And in 75, who had really seen that many sharks? How many people had seen sharks at all? Anyway, the silverbacks get aggressive and make some threatening moves, but Vic doesn't flinch. Having a great big gun does a lot for a movie star's confidence. Although I did hear that Clark Gable is an actual hunter, so maybe he didn't have to fake any of this, and this is what he would do anyway. So nothing happens other than some howling, although later that night the romance begins. I'm talking about the gorillas. Although later that night the romance begins again as Vic and Lynn get back to some passionate necking. They plan to tell Donnie what's been going on and I guess be together openly, but not yet. Vic sits morosely by the fire, getting teased by Eloise about how good a shot Donzie is. She says Donzie. So be careful, Vicky man. Yeah, keep up things with this blonde and you might catch a bullet from the Englishman. Kelly can see that he's truly in love this time, though, so she gives him her blessing and says she wants him to be happy no matter what. She plays some angry solitaire back in her tent, with a cheetah strolling through one side of her tent and out the other, only stopping to sniff at the kings, queens, and threes for a second. Close encounter, but this fearsome kitty clearly didn't care much for cards, and I guess not for angry bombshells who are playing those cards. The next day, Vic plans to tell Dawn about the Linda situation, but then realizes just how in love Mr. Nordley is with his wife. There's a bit of a Casablanca thing going on here, where the star of the movie knows his romantic rival needs the lady he loves more than he himself does. The gorillas come out to roar at the men, but Donald freaks out and drops his camera when a big one gets too close. Vic turns and shoots it dead, probably wishing he'd killed Dawn and not the rampaging gorilla. Vic goes back to his tent and decides to get rip-roaring drunk because, of course, they took a bunch of wino with them on safari. Only Kelly shows up to find out what happened. Instead of ragging on him yet again, she cuddles up next to him and shares a drink. Linda shows up and sees what she thinks is going on, but Noble Vic thinks quickly and pretends that he and Honey Bear were about to bump. Then maybe Linda will stop loving him and go back to her humdrum married life. He so effectively plays how much he was just fooling around with Linda on safari, and it didn't mean anything to him, that she pulls a Chicago on the dude and shoots him in the arm. He had it coming. You bastard! And like all Hollywood stars did back then, he barely even reacts to being shot. Kelly also lies about what happened to make it look like Vic was making an unwanted play for Linda, So then the marrieds can pretend all the overtures, drunken in this case, were coming from Vic, not at all from Linda. She's hurt, but she gets to save face and get away with whatever level of cheating she had already been guilty of. And by the way, I said that he doesn't sell that he was shot, but he does bleed. I was impressed that they actually showed as much blood as they do in this scene. They should, but they often didn't back then. Oh my God, people bleed when they're shot. The next day, Vic says he's going to stick around and try to capture some baby gorillas for their oh-so-fun future in a zoo. He somewhat proposes to Honey Bear, who doesn't like that making an honest woman of her only suits him, not that he truly wants her as much as she wants him. As everyone but Vic starts boating away, him yelling out to Brownie to take good care of her is enough to cause her to break out in a grin and leap out of the boat, trudging to shore to give her man a great big lion and tiger and bear hug. And we're out. We see brief end credits at this point, although we don't get to watch them have loud, intense makeup sex. And you know what? If he's going to love anybody out here in the wilderness, she might be a great choice. For a city girl, she adjusted to this harsh environment pretty quickly. And since I didn't do the nutshell yet, let's pop it in here. So Mogambo, in a nutshell, sloppy seconds. And that usually suggests a woman who's the seconds, but now it's the man. His conscience got the best of him, and he's settling for the woman he seems far better suited to be with. Kelly's playing second fiddle, but at least she's in the band. I don't know if you listened to Manhattan, and I don't know if you noticed this, but I don't think I did a nutshell for that. I'm not always going to do them. If I can't find one that makes me mildly amused or even laugh out loud, or hopefully make you laugh out loud, that's the whole point, and sometimes miss the point of the movie, that's also the point of the nutshell, then I just didn't bother doing one because these started by trying to make Bev laugh, and she's not here. So the cast, and it's not a big cast for what you could call an epic. Once you get past the 3 stars, there aren't even a dozen actors credited. Of course, if they credited the African actors, that might have been a different story because there are a lot of them in this thing. Anyway, Ava Gardner was most definitely not John Ford's first choice for this role, and I guess he made that clear to her during filming, so she didn't have the best time making Mogambo. Still, Oscar nomination. She rose above the adversity. Gardner had a very good career, but the only other movie I gave much thought to covering, just to get her on this channel at least once, was The Killers. I'm a little surprised she made the top 25 lady stars at all, considering her resume just isn't all that awesome. I think she was 25th on the AFI's top 100 stars list, which was 50 actors, men and women, 25 of each, and then 50 actors who weren't even eligible for that list talk about them. That was a dumb idea. Why didn't you just have it be 50 and 50, 100 people in total, and include everybody who's ever lived? If somebody likes somebody enough to vote for them because they made 3 movies like Jimmy Dean, fine, although he was dead, so that was all. I'm rambling. Never even liked that list. Yet still, I covered this now, and I covered Mae West last year, and She Done Him Wrong, and I covered a few other movies because I want to try to get every single AFI actor from those 50 in a movie at least once on this channel. I think we're down to just Sophia Loren and Mary Pickford now. All right, from that tangent, we go back to what I've got written here. So I'm a little surprised Gardner made the list at all. Some good movies, not many great ones. Although I do remember liking On the Beach, which I haven't seen in probably 25 years. Oh, and I do like and own 7 Days in May on DVD. I just don't remember her being anything close to one of the main characters in that the way that she is in this. Ava was married to Frank Sinatra at this point, and had been for not even a year. He was there with everyone on location quite a lot, even though he and Gardner's marriage was rocky, and they got into a lot of screaming matches. I guess he didn't have much else to do, though, since his career had plateaued and his comeback in From Here to Eternity hadn't happened yet. They didn't start filming that flick until several months later. The honeymoon period of this marriage between 2 Hollywood dreamboats was bad enough that apparently Gardner left the set for a while, and not because she was sick, but because she went home to get an abortion. She didn't want to have old Blue Eyes' baby. She never had anyone's baby, even though she was married 3 times, and one of those was to matrimonial machine Mickey Rooney. Clark Gable was in 3 AFI movies, all of which won Best Picture. It Happened One Night, Mutiny on the Bounty, and Gone with the Wind. We reviewed all those back in the early days of this podcast. He was nominated 3 times for Best Actor in his career, and it was for those 3 movies. He won the trophy for It Happened One Night, which is my favorite of those by a mile. The best part of his career was definitely in the 30s, which is when all 3 of those came out, but he remained a star until his last film, The Misfits, in 1961. The infamous film with Monty Clift and Marilyn Monroe, where they say she killed him because she was Marilyn Monroe, being late and not knowing her lines and taking forever to make scenes happen. And then he died soon after, apparently. I shouldn't laugh, I guess, but it's just funny to think that an actress or an actor drives somebody crazy enough that he just dies because the experience is so tough. You are still acting. You're in a trailer more often than you're actually on set anyway. Get over yourselves. I read that he didn't click with John Ford and was annoyed at the way Ford was treating Ava Gardner. Look, Ford is a legend. If they did an AFI list of the greatest directors, and I think they should, I bet he'd be ranked number 1. Or at the very least, he'd be in the top 5 with Hitchcock, and probably Marty Scorsese would be in there too. But he was also a major league prick. We talked about some of the things he did to actors, even to John Wayne, who we worked with so many times. And those things would probably end a director's career real fast these days. Maybe part of the problem was he liked to work with his stock company. None of these 3 stars was in that company. And maybe he was cheesed off that MGM saddled him with these people. Well, be professional, John. If you don't love them, get through the job and go back to Monument Valley with Duke and Brennan and Ward Bond, which I think he did several more times. Did Brennan work with John Ford? I could have that wrong. He worked with Howard Hawks. I think Brennan worked with Ford at some point. But of course, Duke and Ward Bond, both in The Searchers a couple years after this, directed by Ford. Grace Kelly did quite a bit of TV before breaking out as Gary Cooper's wife in High Noon the year before this came out. Then she did Rear Window, Dial M for Murder, and The Country Girl, all in 1954. She won the Best Actress for the worst of those three movies, The Country Girl. We reviewed High Noon and Rear Window, and we will review Dial M for Murder at some point this year, probably in the next few months. Grace was huge for about 4 years in the 50s, but gave all that up to marry royalty and become the Princess of Monaco. Gracie was from Philly, but here, and in many other movies, she's got at least a slight British accent. Now, she is playing a British character, with her husband clearly being British, but she was faking that. She would have fit in well with most Hollywood actresses about 10 or 20 years earlier, when they all seemed to sound like they were from posh London society, even if they were born in Buffalo or Boise. They were all so hippie to be an actress. I'm so hippie. I guess she and Gable got involved while making this movie, but then he lost interest for a number of reasons. Ava Gardner had her own personal problems during the shoot, but she warned the Gracester that Gable was a love him and leave him kind of guy, that he'd move on after he'd conquered a woman. That's what Victor does to Eloise in this movie, at least for a while, until the end when he proposes and you don't really believe that he truly wants to be with her. He's settling. Maybe Gable was just a method actor. I don't know, maybe not. Did he never drop the accent? Did he insist people call him by his character's name even at dinner? Did he act like the just pretend school of acting is completely invalid? Then I guess he wasn't a method actor. Donald Sinden was in The Day of the Jackal 20 years later, and he did plenty of other motion pictures. Nothing that really stood out to me, though. His resume is truly filled with TV shows and TV movies. Philip Stainton plays Brownie. He's doing a heck of a job. He was familiar with John Ford because he had an uncredited role in The Quiet Man. Stainton I think it's Stainton, it's with an I in there. Stanton, but with an I, Stainton. He mostly made English films like The Lady Killers, but did work with John Huston on Moby Dick a few years after this experience. Making adventure movies in the jungle and in water must have been brutal back in the 50s. Not that it's easy even now, big budget or not. Their director was the legendary John Ford, who, as I said a few minutes ago, also seemed to be a legendary a-hole. We've talked about his work on Stagecoach, The Grapes of Wrath, The Quiet Man, The Searchers, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. The man won 4 Oscars, including for The Grapes of Wrath and The Quiet Man. Ford worked a lot and was often far from the comfort of a studio. I think he made 2 movies between this and Mr. Roberts in 55, so only 2 years later, and he did 2 movies in between these ones. And Quiet Man was just a matter of months before this, and anyway, he worked all the time. So as much time as he spent in Monument Valley in Utah, is it? Here he is in Kenya and Uganda and so on over in Africa, and they went to Ireland a year or maybe 2 before to make The Quiet Man, which came out the year before this. The guy traveled a lot to make his films. The flick was written by John Lee Mahin, I guess, Mahin, who based it on Wilson Collison's play, which Collison called Red Dust, and they made a film called Red Dust over 20 years earlier, but set it in Vietnam. Clark Gable starred in that version too, and Mahin, or whatever his name is, wrote it. This is basically a bigger budget color version with even bigger lady co-stars than they had cast in the 30s in Red Dust. He also did some uncredited work on The Wizard of Oz and was given dialogue credit on the original Scarface, which I covered last year. The producer was Sam Zimbalist, who took home an Oscar for producing Ben-Hur at the end of the 50s, and that was his last credit. I think I heard that he died while they were making Ben-Hur, so William Wyler not only directed that enormous project, but he produced a lot of it too. As for Zimbalist, it looks like he often worked on location pictures like they were doing here. And this, as I've been saying, was far from a smooth shoot, but another wrinkle is that there was a potential war between African tribes while they were there. Fun! And those kinds of problems, really in the end, are on the producer. He's got to make this work and not have people get hurt or killed. I didn't read why they had 2 cinematographers on this shoot, but they did. Robert Surtees and Freddie Young were the 2 guys. Maybe one did the location shooting and the other did the studio stuff? Or maybe Ford battled with one of them and fired him. Anyway, they combined to shoot this in the old Academy ratio, so in the 1:37:1 format. This was made right around the time widescreen was taking off on The Robe and other flicks, and I'm sure Ford would have taken advantage of that aspect ratio if he shot this movie that way, but no can do, 4:3. The Criterion Channel has had a thing for Ava Gardner lately, and who can blame them? So that's how I watched it, although TCM aired it a few times recently too, so there's a pretty good chance they'll run it again before too long if you care to check it out after hearing me jaw about it today. As for Surtees, he won 3 Oscars, including for 2 flicks we've covered, The Bad and the Beautiful and Ben-Hur. The Graduate, The Last Picture Show, and The Sting are 3 more classic titles in his resume. There you go, mix of black and white, color, comedy, epic. Impressive. Young took home 3 Gold Naked Guys himself, all 3 for David Lean epics. And we've reviewed 2 of those, Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago. I mentioned a minute ago that I saw this on the Criterion Channel, but the film didn't get a remastering to truly belong with the ones that look all spiffy on that streaming site. Sometimes the movie looks pretty bad, in fact. Oh, incidentally, Mogambo doesn't mean anything, even though the first thing you see in the trailer is that it means the greatest. Somebody just made that up. And what does this story have to do with anybody, even Gable, being the greatest anyway? I want to put a capper on my review here. It's perfectly serviceable entertainment and an effective love story. A 6.5 or 7 out of 10 score is fair. I was mostly engaged for the 2-hour runtime, and it's a pretty good production, even if other location movies were more convincingly in the place in which they're set. This, at times, is clearly projection screens. As for the love triangle, or even love rhombus, the romance between Gable and Grace makes very little sense to me, even though they clicked as lovers in reality, but Gable and Gardner makes perfect sense, especially since her character adapts so quickly to being out in this dangerous part of the world. Besides, the blonde priss is married. I guess Vic wants what he can't have, and no longer wants what he already had. You can't always get what you want as you scroll with your mouse down the page. As for the age difference, Gable was 20 years older than Gardner and nearly 30 years older than Grace Kelly, which was a similar story with Bogey and Hepburn and Sabrina. But as I said during the Manhattan podcast, I don't get why people get so hung up on that. If these were real people who were 20 or even 30 years apart in age, and I guess these two were that far apart in age and actually having sex, and they're fine with that, then shut up. There are far bigger things to worry about than whether or not a young woman is really getting what you think she should want. Let's just trust that she's there on her own accord until there's evidence that she's not, like maybe with Woody Allen. So that was how I saw Mogambo. My next solo show won't go up until almost a month from now. Bev and I are planning to talk about the Oscars the day after the fact on Monday the 11th, so an Oscars post-view show we always call it. Plus we already have an episode going up that morning. So that's enough for the talking to me for a while. When I do sit down alone again, it'll be on March 22nd, and I'll be reviewing a Best Picture winner that took home the prize 75 years ago. It's All the King's Men, although I'm recording this on Groundhog Day, so by then maybe things will have changed, but that's the plan at least, All the King's Men. You never know though, and I might get eager and exceed expectations and pull a horse feathers on you, i.e. review something that's not advertised. As of now, The King and His Men, March 22nd. The next thing you'll find on Have You Ever Seen will be in 3 days. Bev will be back as we wrap up Love in a Word month, and we'll be talking about our first Jean-Luc Godard film, Contempt. That will be our first Brigitte Bardot movie also. The movie's called, I think it's pronounced Le Mépris in French, but Contempt is the English title. Look through the archive on this channel to see a wide range of films that we've reviewed over the years. If you like anyone in this project other than Ava Gardner, because this is the first time for her, Ford, Gable, Kelly, then you'll find quite a few episodes about their other flicks. I think I mentioned all of them. Rate our podcast, write a review, comment, like, share, subscribe. Do all that on your podcast app or on YouTube. Maybe you're listening to this on YouTube, but if you're not, search for @HYES Ellis in your browser, just like it's a web page. Take it right to the main page for all of our reviews. Or if you want to just find something particularly, I believe it's @HYES. No, it would be Have You Ever Seen, and then the movie title. So Have You Ever Seen Manhattan, for example, a couple weeks ago, when you're on YouTube. Of course, you can talk to us in other ways, such as email. That address is haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. Our Twix handles, I've been saying Twitix a lot, haven't I? Twix is what I should have said all along. I think that X thing is so dumb. Anyway, those handles are @MovieFiend51 and @BevEllisEllis. Bev is also on Threads with that same nickname, @BevEllisEllis. And be a pal and see what you think of Sparkplug Coffee's website. They're sparkplug.coffee. Using our HYES promo code will score you a 20% discount. And that's a wrap for today. Thanks so much for joining me. Join Bev and me on Monday when we toss it back and forth about Contempt. Meanwhile, I'm going to leave these apes to their own devices, and I certainly won't steal their babies. After all, a beautiful brunette who wants me and seems to want to stay in Africa with me is waiting back at the camp. I need to go see how she's doing and then shower. End cut.